All right, we got a very interesting consultation today. So if you'd like your own, ask me about anything, askbullmuscle@gmail.com. This one really caught my eye. I was very taken by it as an interesting subject and something that I have to think about a lot with my day job. So let's dive on in. But first, hallelujah, this is something that for about, oh, 4 months, I have been struggling with serious shoulder pain underneath the joint, right here at the center between the end of my trap, the beginning of my right delt. Today is the first day truly in 4 months or so where I have hit the bench press and not had any shoulder pain. The feeling of happiness when I hit 275 for 10 today, just unreal. So super freaking stoked about that. By the way, oh, triceps locking up there. Delt's looking good. Yes, I'm showing off because again, first, excuse me, first workout without any shoulder pain in 4 months. And my left shoulder was acting up for a while too. I'm guessing because I was compensating at some level. But neither my left shoulder wasn't having any issues too. Remains to be seen how truly healed the left shoulder is. We'll do Klokov press to find out. But anyway, that's not relevant to this particular conversation. It's just something I wanted to happily say. On top of that, went ahead and added a new meal to our wonderful Holy Grails thread within the Discord. If you don't know about it, check out the Discord. There's tons of great information. I can't summarize on YouTube, it would take me too long, as well as contributions from other great members of our bull muscle community. So, went ahead and made it was I guess a take on, you might say, the pupusa, which is sort of a Central American equivalent to a pancake. I would say it's closer to a pancake than a pupusa because I don't have the same kind of flour you would use. If there's any good Latin American markets on the island of Oahu, please comment. I would absolutely love to spend some of my hard-earned cash there to find some decent Mexican, Central American, or Caribbean uh, spices, groceries. Obviously, that's going to be hard to get here, but I mean, we got choke Asian markets, but not much if you're looking for anything Latin American. Puerto Rican, you can find Puerto Rican here, but that's about it. And I love Puerto Rican food, but it's not. I, Mexican food is better, mostly because of the spices that are used. Mexican food has a lot of heat, and I like a lot of heat. Central American food's really good too. Like, bro, you go to a good Honduran restaurant or Salvadorian restaurant, you're talking for some good eating right there. Anywho, none of that has to do with any of this consultation. This consultation was really an interesting question. Aloha Bull, I'd like to know, Hawaii has been talking about going green for a while, but you live on a set of islands far away from the rest of the country. How do you plan on doing this? Does Hawaii's goals in this regard seem sustainable? And this is a really good question. So, right, for those of you who don't know, the state of Hawaii has a very, I would say, pretty good record about environmental attitudes, at least. Maybe not actual performance, but there's a lot of sentiment towards aloha aina or malama ika aina here. And apologies to any Hawaiians if I said that incorrectly. I'm working on it. I'm trying. Uh, maybe no can yet, but can in the future, hopefully. That's the goal. Anyway, the state of Hawaii has said they want to be carbon neutral by the year 2045. And the good news is, so we're 20 years from that right now. The good news is wind, solar, to a lesser extent hydro, and to a minimal extent geothermal. Geothermal really only applies to the Big Island or Hawaii Island, depending on really those work for the outer islands. The troublemaker here is Oahu. Before we go any further, I'm going to talk about first off, we got to know okay, well, where does Hawaii's carbon emissions come from? There's two major sources. The first is transportation, because most everything runs on cars here, and most of those cars run on gasoline or diesel fuel, which is obviously not good for the environment. All that diesel fuel has to be imported from the mainland or internationally, and it's got to be brought here on cargo ships that run bunker oil, which is terrible for the ocean quality. So that's not good, obviously. That's really poor. But the second level is electricity generation, right? So those are the two major sources of carbon emissions for the state. There are some other minor ones related to industry, but generally speaking, it is consumption of petroleum and petroleum byproducts that result in most of Hawaii's carbon emissions. So, how do we get those down? Well, sorry, the pupusas, while tasty, I did throw a fair amount of salt on them. And I used kalua pork for the meat, so for the most part, a lot of pupusas they'll do with like carnitas, and kalua pork is going to be the closest thing you can get out here to it. I love kalua pork anyway, so hey, works out pretty well. Um, so the first section of it, let's just talk about gasoline usage and transportation costs. Right now, there is something called the Navahine settlement. The Navahine settlement is a lawsuit filed on the behalf of a generation of children a couple years ago that was successfully won in court in 2024. The idea behind it is that it requires the state of Hawaii and, in particular, Honolulu County. And the reason we're going to focus a little bit more on Oahu than the other islands is very simple. About 70% of the total population of the state lives in Honolulu County, which is the island of Oahu. Okay. The outer islands they have different challenges, and because of how deep the channels are between the islands, you can't build an electric grid to transfer energy between one to the other. So that's out of the question. Even if you could get around the serious environmental problems that would cause, the cost would be astronomical. It's something Hawaii could never afford and should never attempt to build. Moving on from that. So the Navahine settlement, one of the items is that there have to be good carbon free options for people to move around and for goods to move around the island. So, how do you do that? Well, the first section would be to replace some of, in particular, Honolulu County's horrendous car traffic, right? So, well, since the 1950s, and mostly because of the Interstate Highways Act of 1956 and its consequences, you knew this one was going to come up inevitably with this as the topic of the video. Because of the Interstate Highways Act of 1956, and again, in general, the United States as a whole and Hawaii as well is penchant for being very dependent on automobiles. Uh, and automobiles, of course, really not being able to get off of gasoline until the last few years. Even then, electric cars are still, on average, still pretty pricey. They're coming down quickly, though. At this point, if I were ever going to buy a new car, I would buy electric. Even out here where electric prices, and we'll get to that, are extraordinarily high. So, with regards to the automobile usage, well, there's no real good option at present for getting people out of their cars. The first option is train travel or the rail. The rail has been, to put it very mildly, a boondoggle. It has been the victim of many a corrupt politician, many a corrupt construction agency, and Hart has, by all means, a lot of dirt that it's got a lot of mud on its face from this project. The nice thing with the rail is that the worst teething problems are indeed over. Coming October, the next segment of the rail should open. Now, is that going to solve everything? Absolutely not. It still doesn't really go into downtown. The furthest east it's going to extend, the closest to Honolulu proper it's going to get, is going to be the Kalihi Transit Center. So that's not ideal. But that means anything from Kapolei to Kalihi, you can use the rail for. This is going to mean Pearl City, right? And the second phase of the rail is actually really useful. The big reasons are the Makalapa Station, which is going to service Pearl Harbor Naval Station and Hickam Air Force Base. So all the, not just sailors and airmen, but the workers on the bases, be they, I don't know, base exchange or commissary agents, be they civilian shipyard workers like myself, be they mechanics, be they whoever, should be able to use the rail at least a little bit more than previously. So that's the first good part of good news. The second one, which is probably a lot more consequential, is that the airport is now going to be connected. So being able to connect to the airport is a huge thing. In particular, what hopefully you could start to see is, at least for, let's say, Ko'olina traffic, right? Hopefully we'll see the Ko'olina resorts partner up with the rail and just run shuttle buses to the resorts from the Kapolei station. Just tell all the passengers at the airport, hey, you want to go Ko'olina, just take the rail and keep heading Eva side. Should be pretty easy to do. The rail in particular has a lot of space on it, which means you don't have to worry on the same way you would with the buses about where my luggage going to go. You can chuck it on the rail and boom. And Kapolei is close enough to the Ko'olina compounds to where, okay, yeah, a short shuttle bus going to and from there. You could use a bunch of converted like short bus Econo lines if you needed to. Easy, done. That's a huge, I think, benefit. Now, the other and much bigger part of the tourism section is Waikiki. The rail is supposedly nowhere even close to going to Waikiki. And that's a tragedy, especially because looking on Google Maps, I could actually suss out a semi decent route to get there, but there's just no political will for it after it's drained so many billions of dollars. Right now, we've spent, I believe, something around the lines of $10 billion since the project started in 2008. But the other very nice part of this is that hours are going to extend. Right now, the rail only goes until 7 at night, which is stupid. It's it only goes to the Aloha Stadium, and then it only goes to 7 at night, which makes it pretty unhelpful for the most part. Uh, so, okay. Whether or not the rail was a good idea to build, well, it's already been built, so you might as well at least make it more useful. These next four stops should do that. That's going to be a helper. Eventually, their target is 2031. We'll see about that. I'm not holding my breath, and nor should you. The idea is that the rail will get all the way to Kaka'ako. That's still not in Waikiki, but it's a lot closer, and in theory, you could take it to avoid the worst of uh, the traffic. And hopefully, at the Kaka'ako station, they're going to run some buses from there into Waikes. If if Honolulu County can't figure that one out, then we've got bigger problems. Likewise, I think that's the plan for Kalihi Transit Center. The idea is that you get off the rail at Kalihi, and then there will be buses going from Kalihi Transit Center basically all over the island, which is the way it should work. The idea is that the rail, right, like, the 51, the 40, the 42, the rail can help remove some of the load off the buses, which means the buses can be focused. You can improve ridership, or you can improve uh, throughput times, you can improve service, you can improve speed by not necessarily running the routes that go co-terminally with the rail. And you can run rail stop to rail stop sort of as a hub and a modified hub and spoke. Eventually, hopefully again, suck it up, finish the fucker, get it to at least Kaka'ako. That should help. And I mean, if it doesn't go to Waikiki, at least if nothing else, that should at least allow some local traffic to go through. Like, again, shipyard workers or anybody who works at the two bases, in theory, you could take, if you lived in Kaka'ako or downtown, you could take the rail from there all the way to the station. But it's not been built yet. They're still digging up Dillingham Boulevard, and it's going to take a hot minute. But hopefully, eventually, that's going to go through. It sounds like they're not going to stop. At least they're going to try and finish this thing to 2031. And I think with every additional stop, there's going to be better ridership numbers, and they're also going to extend hours. Supposedly, these next four stops, the rail is going to go until 10 at night, which is a lot better. That's a huge difference. Like that should make it a lot more useful for off shift or airport workers. Let's say, you live out in Kapolei or Waipahu, well, and you work at the airport. Well, you should have no problem just hopping on the train and back. That's what I would do. The other one is bicycle networks. Now, I am a volunteer and a huge proponent of Hawaii Bicycling League, and I think they do a lot of really good work. Slowly but surely, the city of Honolulu is building out its bike network. There's some gaping holes. The biggest one is Kalihi. There is no good way to ride your bike through Kalihi right now, and I disagree with HBL's approach that North King Street should be the one to be converted. Dillingham is already torn to shit. People hate driving on it. You might as well just turn Dillingham into Hotel Street, basically. Hotel Street is supposedly bikes and car or buses and car or buses and bikes only, excuse me. You might as well make Dillingham that and leave North King for the cars. Cars still have to get through Kalihi. You might as well give North King is already set up for a larger throughput of cars. It was more set up than Dillingham ever was, so you might as well just leave it alone and let the bicycles use Dillingham, especially because the Nimitz bike path starts right there, pretty much at Kalihi Transit Center. So if you could, that would be another one. You can ride your bike on the rail. There's tons of space, so you could take, if you were clever about it, you could, if you built a decent enough bike path from the rail stop in Kalihi into town, people who were trying to avoid it or couldn't afford a car because affordability is a massive problem out here, you could at least train and then bike into town. That to me seems like the no-brainer. Frankly, with the amount of money that was spent, some would say wasted, I can see their argument on the rail. You might as well have, like, if you had spent just a fraction of that on improving Oahu's bike networks, I think you'd have taken way more cars off the road in long term, and you'd have decreased obesity rates. I've talked at length about how great bicycles are. This isn't the video for me to go over the benefits, but it makes your gut skinnier, it makes your wallet fatter, right? Do you think this happened by accident? I just ate a 1,800 calorie meal and I still look like that, right? That doesn't happen on accident. It's a big part of it is because I ride my bike to work all the time, and I really only use my car for like going North Shore or going Windward Side. The other one is buses. I think the tragic story here is that probably should have gone with like overhead wire trolley buses. Is probably the cheaper option. Yeah, it's a little bit more upfront for investments, but you don't have to require these big, heavy battery buses that then require tons of electricity to charge on. You just run it on the catenary wires, basically. I'm a big fan of trolley buses. I don't think Oahu's ever going to do that, but one can dream. Okay, so that's more or less the transportation side of it. I'm going to be very interested to see how serious Honolulu County is about honoring that settlement. I hope they are. It would be good for the economy here. It would be good for reducing costs of living, and it would be good for drivers. Drivers, for those of you who really do need to drive for whatever reason, you could say there are no bus routes near your house, the rail doesn't go where you're trying to go, a bicycle doesn't work for you because of X, Y, and Z. Whatever your reason is, drivers, you should want everybody else to use transit and drive as little as possible because that declogs the roads, right? If a bus takes 60 cars off the road or 30 cars off the road, that's a win for you guys. So, and any drivers who want to see Honolulu's horrendous congestion problem get improved should be largely in favor of alternatives to driving. It's a better option for everyone. It really is. Yeah, it means you might have to sacrifice one extra lane for a bike path and a wider sidewalk. But if that decreases the amount of cars on the road by a larger percentage, then you've still had a net win. Anywho, okay. So let's talk about number two. And that's where I'm going to spend a little bit more time on because that's where the meat of this consultation was about. I know I kind of rambled there, but the problem, the addiction with cars on this island is a huge one. Now, I'll say one more thing about transportation for the outer islands. For the most part, the best way to do that, the outer islands are not population dense enough to justify much more than bus lines as public transit. Uh, Kauai and Maui, uh, those are probably just dense enough to where a few regional bus lines might work. The Big Island is 8 times the size of Oahu and has something like, I want to say 15%, maybe 20% of the population. As a result, it's just not the Big Island is its own sort of beast when it comes to that thing. But because of geothermal power, the Big Island should be able to generate a lot more electricity, and therefore electric cars should be a lot more viable there. So that's going to be the second part of this, electricity, right? A couple quick facts. The state of Hawaii at present gets 76% of its electric power from imported petroleum. And when I say oil here, I'm not saying oil like gasoline or diesel fuel. This shit's bunker fuel. It's the lowest quality petroleum distillate because it's being burned in this gigantic power plant. These turbines run combined cycle, and they range from fairly new, around the 90s or 2000 to all the way as old as 1938. Uh, the big ones are the electric plants out at what used to be Barber's Point, around Nanakuli, and then at Waiau, which is near Pearl City. The Waiau one in particular is the biggest head scratcher to me, but we'll get back to that. They're saying they want to run it off of biofuels, but okay, you're still going to have to import biofuels with a giant tanker, either from another island here in Hawaii or more realistically from another country or the mainland. Biofuels realistically aren't going to get the job done. They're the cheapest in the sense that you don't have to replace any of the turbines you're already running. You can just retrofit them. Still a minor expense, but much cheaper overall. Uh, but let's talk about the outer islands, then we'll get to Oahu because that's the biggest one here. The outer islands, in particular the Big Island should have no problem hitting carbon free by 2025 or 2045. The way wind turbine prices are going down, solar prices are going down, PVs are going down, hydroelectric's getting more affordable, and geothermal is getting more affordable. Even if, due to native Hawaiian Kanaka Maoli sentiment, they would really rather not do geothermal. Understandable. I'm not touching that one with a 10-foot pole. It's not my place to do so. Even if you want to exclude geothermal, there's enough open land, especially at elevation where solar performs better on the Big Island to where generating enough power for the relatively low population that lives there, solar should be able to handle the Big Island just fine. The same can be said for Maui because you don't have to build it all the way to the top of Haleakala. You can find what places that perhaps plants don't grow, that's maybe a little bit more what we might define as barren, you know, place it where it makes sense. But there's enough space and a low enough population on Maui to where you should have no problem with solar. Lanai and Molokai should be the exact same thing. Population's very low. Solar should handle pretty much everything. I believe in Niihau it actually already does. Again, the population of Niihau, you can't even go there unless you know the right people, is under 1,000 anyway. So it's for the total state, it's basically a blip. It doesn't really factor in. Kauai is a little bit different, but again, there's enough land and few enough people to where you can probably make wind and solar work. That leads us to Oahu. So, remember this figure? Well, that's just for the state. The problem is worse on the island with the most people. So, the trouble here is very simple. Not only do you have far more people who, as a result, demand far more power on Oahu than any of the other islands, in fact, than all the islands put together, you have less space to build it on because most of the land that can be settled on here more or less already has. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at a map of Oahu, you have two major mountain ranges, the Ko'olau and the Waianae. Those two mountain ranges are pretty treacherous to build on. The fact that there are electric wires moving around or going through some of those passes is mind blowing, and hats off to whatever crazy bugger they got to do that job. Oh my God. Like if you ever go up like Iea Ridge as an example, or any of those hikes, Waimano Falls or Radar Hill Road at Fort Shafter, any of those, you will see those electric wires, and it is absolutely crazy just how the power lines have actually been strung across those foothills of the mountains there. It's really impressive. But the point here is that there is a lot more uh, power demand and a lot less land. So you have those two mountain ranges. You can't really build solar panels, for instance, on, you can put some on rooftops, but that's a very limited amount of space. Rooftops have to be at the right angle. They have to be well built enough to support them. And a lot of housing infrastructure here is a lot older, so they're not. A lot of there are also a lot of monuments, right? You're not going to go putting solar panels on Punchbowl Crater, and you shouldn't. You're not going to go putting them on Cocoa Head, and you shouldn't. You're not going to be able to put lots of them on the military bases for national security reasons, although there are some places they could. The military on this island really could stand to use the land it has a lot better. Of course, then you get the historical preservation wombles. Okay, minor rant here. There are a group of people who sit here and do this. Yes, I'm demonetizing. I don't care about December 7th, 1941. Now, I work at Pearl Harbor for a living. I am aware of how important a date that is. But there are these people that are like, that say every building is historically significant on the shipyard and on the base to where nothing can ever get upgraded because it still has to look like it did in 1941. Apart from being not how entropy works. That's a failure to understand entropy because things break down over time. You have material creep, things just fail, right? Especially buildings built 85 years ago or older. Ignoring that for a moment, it, from a national security perspective, there have been advancements in warfare over the last 85 years that might justify retrofitting or even, God help you, demolishing some old buildings. Right next to one of the buildings I work at is a completely derelict building with trees growing out the old 19 Roosevelt era glass panes on the window. And we are legally unable to do anything with that building because of these historical preservation wobbles. Look, I get it. You mean well, but you're making things a lot worse. Anyway, the point is there's a lot of land that's for military usage, and therefore you can't really build more energy on. The other issue with Oahu in particular is you have some, not a lot, but some heavy industry here. You have the port, which is huge and requires electricity 24/7, right? How are you going to operate those cranes? That's a necessity, right? You have hospitals here. The other islands, for the most part, if you have a serious injury, you get sent to Honolulu and they'll treat you here. Uh, that doesn't always, it's not always the case, but if you have serious medical concerns, a lot of the time the other islands send them here. You have military installations that, yes, they require 24/7 power. You have Waikiki, right? The tourist industry, love it or hate it, is an industry and it requires power at night, especially for all those tourists who think 80 degrees is too warm and you can't possibly enjoy room temperature being 80 degrees. But that's that's a mainlander problem. The point here is that Oahu has different energy requirements and different energy needs than the other islands. It needs not only a lot of power, a lot more power, but it needs baseload power. Moreover, if we're going to try and get all these vehicles to electric, as we should over the coming couple decades, well, what's that going to do to electricity demand? Is it going to go up or is it going to go down? I'll leave you to figure that one out. Another one is Hawaii is trying to diversify its economy, as it should. Well, part of that is trying to get a little bit more into tech. What is tech using right now? AI. What does AI do? Consumes a shit ton of electricity. As it turns out, if you're setting your electricity rates at 45 cents a kilowatt hour, thanks, Hecko, you fucking idiots. You really cannot compete with basically anyone because that's an absurdly high electric price. Even California kind of laughs at that. So as a result, the point here is that you you need not just a lot of energy, but you need baseload energy. Now, so let's talk about the solutions here. I give you the Republican Party solution, the status quo, which is for Hawaii not good. Okay, I am not some vote blue no matter who Democrat. Okay, but the Republican solution of just keep drilling and consuming more and more oil is bad for national security. It is bad for the climate and it's bad for the economy. It's not good on any account. You, especially for Hawaii, the status quo is being ever more dependent on more and more oil shipments. That's not smart. And I think even on this, I will say the Republican Party operates a little differently, being a small minority party in effect out here in Hawaii. So thankfully, we don't have a lot of people who want to support this option, especially considering, again, that electricity prices are obscenely high. You don't have to deal with that as much. So, thankfully, the status quo, I mean, if you do that, you're basically giving the middle finger to anybody who won in the Navahine settlement. You're giving a middle finger to the keiki. You're basically saying, I don't care. Don't do that, right? We as a country, as the United States, and as Hawaii, we can do better than that. I think we all can agree that the current status quo is not the way Hawaii should go. So, number two, which I'm going to call wind, solar, and unicorn farts. Why am I calling this wind, solar, and unicorn farts? First off, let me be very clear about something. I am not against wind, solar, or any other renewable form of energy, okay? I am a nuclear engineer. I do have my biases. However, there are some unique challenges to Oahu that will make making 100% of our electricity, again, remember, electric demand is going to keep going up with electric vehicles, with increasing electrification, right? Eventually, we're going to get rid of all those gas stoves, yeah? Increasing electrification of the houses and AI. Those things are going to increase electric demand 24/7. So, on top of already taking 83% of our current electric demand from imported oil. So, not to mention that rail uses electric power too. Not very much relative in the large scheme of things, but you get the point. And then, what if we want to electrify the bus lines? That's also going to increase demand. So, first off, the challenge is here. You would think it'd be cost. No, not really. Even out here, wind and solar are substantially cheaper, even though they're more difficult to build because of how expensive power already is. So, in particular, solar, like rooftop solar, is a no-brainer in this state, which is why you see it on a ton of houses here. And that might be part of the problem. We're already getting close to the majority, if not at least a plurality of houses that have solar panels or are planning on getting them pretty soon, which means we're not really solar on rooftops is not moving the meter. You could put solar on rooftops on basically every building on this island and you still wouldn't be able to cut our oil addiction. Not completely. You'd put a dent in it, but that's as far as it would go. So where are you going to build more solar panels? Well, there are some farms and fields in the center of the island in the saddle between the two mountain ranges near Wahiawa, near Mililani, but those are rapidly like near Kunia, north of Waipahu. You're already starting to get to the point where a lot of those we're already hitting the saturation point that's already been built. And efficiency gains from solar panels are just not really enough to move the meter. Then you have, if you go out to Nanakuli, you will see signs that say, end environmental racism, do not build a solar farm here. There's an existing produce farm, I think of some kind. I don't know what. It's a farm of some kind, but they don't want to build solar panels there, and that's fine. That's fine. I get where NIMBYism comes from, and that is NIMBYism. Don't get me wrong, but if you're gonna say you want to go renewable, and then you want to say, well, don't build it here, there's just not that much elsewhere to build it. So it's the same problem with the wind turbines in Kahuku, right? The locals in Kahuku don't like the wind turbines. They have their reasons, and some would argue they're valid. Okay, but then where are you going to build them? Where, if we want to add more wind power to Oahu's electric grid, where are you going to put them? You're going to put them in the Ko'olau Range and ruin the mountains? Not to mention the costs of, connecting it to the grid from the mountains is a lot higher. Are you going to build it out at sea where people are going to protest that you're not respecting the ocean? Are you going to give me a flippant answer, say, oh, just build it where all the haole live? Okay, you could put a giant solar panel and a giant wind turbine on Hawaii Kai and Kailua and Lanikai. It still doesn't fix the problem. And let's be honest, the people who live in those three areas are so rich, they'll be able to out NIMBY you. So, as flippant and as good as that might feel to say, it's not a realistic solution. So, the problem here, where does it go? Where do you put it? Do you put solar panels out at the sunniest part of the island? Out at Kaena Point? Ooh, that's a state park. You've also got monk seals that are out there. Do you want to risk damaging the monk seals, their natural habitat? There's a lot of problems here. So, if you want to go with this, there's one ugly truth, okay? If you want Oahu to run on entirely off of wind and solar and renewables, there's only one way to make that happen. Depopulation. You would need to basically you can decide who, but probably at least 50% of the people living on this island to leave. Good luck getting the US military to be part of that 50%. Now, I get, again, a lot of the Hawaiian Kingdom people would like for that to be the case, but first off, if you do that, it's going to damage the economy really bad. You're going to have a lot of unemployment. But second off, let's be practical. The US military, especially given how much Winnie the Pooh over in Beijing is acting up, the US military is not going anywhere here. Should the US military use its land a lot better, maybe to help fix this problem, put some solar panels on parts where it makes sense on Schofield Barracks or on Hickam Air Force Base? Absolutely. Uh, should the US military do a lot better in terms of the way it treats residents of this island and in this state? Without question. I will not argue that because it's correct. Yes. The US military has not been very good stewards of the land here. All I have to do is say Red Hill fuel spill, and anyone who lives on this island knows exactly what I mean. However, again, even if you want to stick your head where the sun don't shine up your okole and say, okay, we're going to try and get rid of the U.S. military, you're still not going to have enough people leave the island to where this is feasible. You'd probably need to gut the tourism industry too. And if you did that, again, you're gonna reduce a lot of this island to poverty. That's not wise. Even if it were realistic, which we all know it isn't. Uh, one can dream. I think even if you did that, you'd still probably not have enough from wind and solar. You'd be getting closer, but the point here is that you'd have to take drastic measures, or you'd have to start really rationing out electricity, which is something nations like Cuba and Venezuela do. Don't do what Cuba and Venezuela do. So the third and only solution that I can see for the island of Oahu, given its unique combination of difficulty to build, pre-existing developments, rampant NIMBYism, right? And I'm not saying NIMBYism is bad. I'm saying NIMBYism is NIMBYism, and it exists a lot out here, right? And a high population. and industrial loads and all the future loads we want to add with electric vehicles, there's really only one solution. Okay? I'm actually going to draw it out for you. And I know this is going to trigger a lot of people on this island. Yep, this is your solution. Atomic power. You could, okay? And now I'm going to go ahead and check. I believe it's about 1,000 megawatts that the island currently produces from all of its oil-fired turbines. But let me check just to be sure. Oahu power plants by production. I think there's a list of power stations in Hawaii. Okay, perfect. So, biggest ones, yep. You got 6 turbines out at the Kahe. You have Kalailoa Cogen, which is that's a combined cycle. Oil can also run natural gas, but it runs oil here. Uh, Again, 76.4% from petroleum so far for the entire state, 83% for Oahu. So you got Waio, that's at 474 megawatts. Kahe, that's 609, so that's 1,075, adding the decimals there. So 1,075. Kalailoa is another 300, so that's 1,375. And then Campbell Industrial, it's another, that's I think Eva side as well, which is another 100 or 113. So you're looking at about 1,500 megawatts. All right. So 1,500 megawatts, you could put down 2 nuclear reactors, 2 AP1000 nuclear reactors, and you'd have 2,000 megawatts. Okay, that's why it's called the AP1000. That's basically what Plant Vogel did in Georgia. Now, everybody's going to point to the cost overruns at Plant Vogel. Those were the first AP1000s to be built, and they had to be completely redesigned because of the NRC being fucking stupid after Fukushima and screaming like it had summoned the demons of Salzar as though they were Filthy Frank. Because, oh my God, Fukushima happened! Scream and run around in circles because earthquakes like that can happen everywhere. No, no, they can't. Why are you applying these seismic standards to something 100 miles inland? Earth to the NRC. Earth to the NRC, you fucking idiots. I have a bone to pick with the NRC, and one thing I'm thrilled President Trump has done is defang them, make them do their job, which is actually approving nuclear power plants. Okay, so the question here is pretty obvious. How the fuck are you going to build a nuclear power plant in Hawaii? Well, the first challenge is legislative. Since 1973, it requires, I think, a 67% majority to approve any civilian nuclear power plant in the state, which would basically require everyone on the island of Oahu to say yes. Because realistically, everyone on the outer islands is going to see what Oahu is doing there and be like, no, fuck you. I don't think the outer islands would be very keen on that. So you got to scrap that rule and make it a simple majority, or better still, make it not require a congressional vote to build a nuclear power plant. I don't see why that's necessary, right? Let private industry decide whether or not it's necessary. The good news is, again, at a 45 cents a kilowatt hour electric cost, basically any power source is going to be cheaper than the status quo. Money's not the problem for wind and solar. Where you put it is the problem for wind and solar on this island. Nuclear, the good news is it's extraordinarily land dense, unlike wind or solar. In other words, you could plop down 2 nuclear reactors, maybe one out at Nanakuli out there, or at Kalailoa, or you could put 2 at Waio, and then boom, it's done. It's already connected up to the electric grid. You just have to completely replace it. Now, you're going to say, well, nuclear power plants take a long time to build. Yes, they do. However, under the Trump administration, this is probably the easiest it's been to build a nuclear power plant since the 1980s. This would be the time to start. And again, with the overruns from Vogel, yes, you can learn, right? You're not going to have to worry about redesigning it again unless the NRC cornholes itself, but that you can't really predict that, whether or not that'll happen. At least under the current administration, the NRC is going to be a little bit less irrationally fearful. So you get started on it now, and maybe by, again, the goal is carbon free by 2045. You can absolutely build a nuclear power plant in 20 years. You can build it in less than 10 if you really know what you're doing. Better still, okay, would be instead of building a new nuclear power plant like an AP1000, there's a much more cost-effective way of doing this. What you do, okay? What you do is you take the next Nimitz-class aircraft carrier that gets completely decommissioned, okay? Each Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, this is per Wikipedia, generates 550 megawatts each. What you do is you hook up that Nimitz-class aircraft carrier to the grid. Now, you can either decide to do an open heart surgery, lift the reactor compartments out of the aircraft carrier and plop them at Wyo, which is what I would do, or you can, even better, just ask the Navy to leave the boat operating, pay the Navy a chunk, or maybe as a settlement for the whole Red Hill debacle, just let the Navy run the power plant for you and pretty much crank out free electricity or reduce price electricity for the island. I think the Navy owes this island more than that, but I think this is a very reasonable way to start. And before you say, well, how the fuck would you trust the Navy to run anything nuclear? Well, the fact that we've been doing so for the last 75 years with the submarines on this island, and we've had no problems. And the Navy is not without fault for its environmental record on this island. However, the nuclear Navy, which is a different subset, has done an excellent job, and it's to the point where other nations come to the United States for advice, especially with anything nuclear power related. So you could do that. I think that would be by far and away the simplest answer and the cheapest answer. And if you eventually got to the point where wind and solar really could take on the load, okay, pack it up, deconnect the aircraft carrier from the grid, send it back to the mainland, and that is where you send the waste. The Naval Nuclear Power Plant, the Naval Nuclear Power Program already has waste storage built into it. I'm sure the state of Hawaii and the Navy could come up with a deal here. Seems like a win-win. You don't have to store nuclear waste on the island, although frankly, of all the things that people get scared about irrationally, nuclear waste is one. You can stand right next to a giant fuel pool, like spent fuel rod reactor pool, and nothing will happen. You're not going to get any appreciable amount of radiation. You can even dive into the pool. As long as you don't swim too close, you're also not going to get much in the way of appreciable radiation. The radiophobia for the general American populace that has been installed largely by the left wing here. So we're gonna talk about how fucking stupid the Democrats are here for a second. I already bashed on the Republicans earlier. But the anti-nuclear hysteria since 1979 in particular, from largely people that would call themselves Democrats or liberals, has immensely damaged the United States' ability to get off of fossil fuels. Congrats, liberals, you played yourselves. But that's really, to me, this is the easiest solution. Go nuclear, set up a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier, sit right there in Pearl Harbor, let it generate some clean, carbon-free electricity from the state, and then whenever you need to refuel it, just, I don't know, trade it out, send whatever next soon-to-be decommed nuclear aircraft carriers there, and then you say, well, who's going to operate this? Who's going to operate the power plants? The amount of naval nukes that retire on this island, I'm sure you could pay several of them to sit there and operate it for you. I guarantee you, if you told any of the naval nukes that worked on these aircraft carriers, or God forbid, submarines, hey, would you like to continue doing this job, but for civilian pay, and you get to stay in Hawaii, you don't have to go anywhere? I guarantee you could do that. Just, plop the sucker up. You've got the grid connections already there at Wyo. Wyo is right next to the water. Just fucking plop it right there in Pearl Harbor. we already have nuclear power plants sitting in the harbor anyway. That's why we have the submarines there. You might as well. Again, to me, it seems like such a no-brainer. It's not. It's not even funny. And what blows my mind is that, speaking of radiophobia, and this is one I'm going to call out the outer islands. There was a hurricane that knocked out Kauai's power plant or power grid for a few days. The U.S. Navy, to its credit, offered to send a submarine up to Kauai. Right, you only need to send a submarine because there's a lot less power demand. A submarine, being a smaller vessel, is going to have a smaller nuclear reactor. Duh. Uh, to power the grid of Kauai until they could get it back on their feet. And the residents of Kauai told the Navy to fuck off. They were offering you free electricity. Why would you tell them to go away? I, come on. I mean, that's just literally that really is. You're just cutting off your nose to spite your face at that point. Look, I get people are scared of nuclear power. But first off, a Chernobyl style nuclear accident is physically impossible to happen on any US reactor, civilian or military. The reason being because none of them have a positive void coefficient, and because they all have containments, and because we're not retards. In other words, we're not communists. The the cavalcade of errors that were required for Chernobyl to happen only could have happened in the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union was an inherent failed system. It's the poster child for why communism doesn't work, not nuclear power. It is hilarious. The more you learn about nuclear accidents, both civilian, Chernobyl, and military, the dozens upon dozens of Russian submarine accidents and Soviet submarine accidents, the more rabidly anti-communist you will become. Holy shit. Uh, no, absolutely not. Yes, and again, am I Mr. Super right wing pro MAGA? No, I'm not. There's a lot of stuff Trump does that are really fucking stupid, but Jesus Christ, no. Not even once. Communism is the fentanyl of economic systems. You're going to cheer really happy on that revolution, and then everything is going to go to shit. Yay, revolution! Woo-hoo! We got rid of the capitalists. We got rid of the bourgeoisie. Hey, where's the food? Oh, that's right. Yeah. No. Do not, under any circumstances, confuse Chernobyl with any U.S. nuclear power plants. Then you say Fukushima. Okay. Pearl Harbor is insulated from most tsunamis because it's an inland harbor. That's why the United States wanted it when we illegally annexed Hawaii in the late 1800s, because it's the only natural safe harbor of its size for 3,000-mile radius, some crazy number like that, right? It's incredibly important for anything geostrategic. It's a huge part of the reason that piracy doesn't exist anymore. The sacrifices made to install Pearl Harbor and later after World War II, Guam and other South and Mid Pacific areas is why you don't have pirates anymore. It's the same reason, right? The U.S. Navy has more or less said to the world, we will protect global international commerce. We'll do it for free. That's why international trade has been so successful over the last 100 years. Piracy died because the U.S. Navy, and to a lesser extent, the British Navy, killed it. Nobody's ever going to thank the U.S. Navy for that. But again, I get it. I get why people don't trust the Navy out here. They have a good reason to. But I would urge anybody who is anti nuclear out here to take a good hard look at the facts and to ask yourself, what are the alternatives? Where are you going to put all that wind and solar power? Where's it going to go? Because I don't see any other way. And if you want to sit here and just say, "Oh, well, we'll figure out where to put it," you're no better off than the people who just want the status quo and want to keep importing oil. Excuse me. So that's really all I had for you. I know this is a long one, but uh, got to rant. It's you could plop down again, you could open heart surgery a aircraft carrier nuclear reactor or two or four. That would work. You could store the waste here temporarily for in spent fuel pools, slap it on dry casks, and then put it on. I'm sure, again, you could work out a deal with the U.S. military to move it back to the mainland. The Navy owes this state that much and then some. Or you could just hook up an actual naval vessel. Like whatever Nimitz class aircraft carrier uh, is going out of commission next. Hell, that's what should have been done in the 60s or the 70s, whenever the first nuclear aircraft carriers were getting decommed. Just put the heart of it out here. And why am I so bullish on that? Well, this goes back to, and I promise I'm going to wrap up here. This goes back to the Atoms for Peace program that was started under Eisenhower in the 50s. The first U.S. naval reactors had a lot of similarities, thanks to the genius of Admiral Hyman Rickover, to the first commercial U.S. nuclear plants. That was by no mistake. The idea here was that the Navy had a very strict set of safety standards. Rickover, for better or for worse, curmudgeon that he was, ensured that naval reactor safety is the gold standard of the world. And we still there are a lot of Rickover memes that circulate around Pearl Harbor. Like, Big Brother is watching you. It's that, but it's just a picture of Rickover's eyes. Another one is the South Park, sit down and study, smack. It's that, but with Rickover. But no, if you tell you what, they did an Oppenheimer film. They got to do one about Hyman Rickover like that. It's just the man was incredibly unpleasant to work with, but very, very, very effective. So, I, the point here I'm trying to make is that the U.S. nuclear navy has an extraordinarily good record when it comes to handling anything radioactive, and it could well be that that's what helps Hawaii kick its oil addiction. More importantly, or more particularly, what helps Oahu kick its oil addiction, because I don't see another way to do it. Anyway, that's all I got for y'all today. I will probably be hanging out in the VC lounge a little bit after this on the Discord, and then I'm going to go for a hike. It's the middle of the day here. It's, as always, beautiful, maybe 88 degrees outside. And I don't really quite feel like torching myself at the beach with a sunburn. Plus, beaches are more fun when you got other people, and everybody else seems to be busy today, so I'm probably go for a hike. Hiking alone is fun. And yeah, if you enjoyed this content, I can talk a little bit more, go a little bit more in depth, or if you have another question for me, can be anything. Can be this, can be, workout plan advice, physical fitness, diet, exercise, philosophy, you name it. AskFullMuscle@gmail.com. Thank you for your patience on this consultation video. I know it took a little bit longer to get to, but there was a lot that had to be unpacked for this one, and I had to take notes. That's the other thing about these. This is why I make you write it to me in email, is because I take notes, okay? I write it all down, and then I try to synthesize a way I want to present the topic. So there's a lot of effort involved here, and I do these for free because I like to help people and I like to answer the questions. So that is it for me today. As always, y'all, make good decisions. Those good decisions form your actions. Those actions form your habits. Those habits form your values. So from an ethos to be the guide to start through the rough waters of life. Much love. Come in for the hug. Shoots. I will see y'all later. Take it easy. Play me out.